actually as happy as I could possibly be.
Ken Epler is a local veteran who struggles with PTSD after an incident just days before combat in the 1991 Gulf War. Since then, he's taken his love for art and made it his safe space.
Balloons popping, fireworks on the 4th of July, cars backfire, and your family doesn't have any idea why you're upset when things happen like that. So, like I said, I went straight to my drawing table or my easel to try and find happy places as quick as I could.
In the time Epler has been painting, many of his works have been displayed in the Evansville Wartime Museum and the Mesker Park Zoo. Today, during the Take Your Kid to Work Day event, he shared with children his art and how his most recent work has made its way to the nation's capital.
I had postcards made of my painting through the Evansville Wartime Museum, and I started passing them out. And I passed one to the guy that runs the Evansville Vet Center over on the east side, and he made contact with Peter Boyd and Congressman Messmer's aide.
Woods and Woods Law Firm also invited other guests from the Wartime Museum to allow the children to get the opportunity to interact with veterans.
Children need to see here today is that that's who we serve. It's veterans, and there's so many different ways that we can serve them. It's not just here in this business. It's at the Wartime Museum. It's Honor Flight. It's all these different organizations out there.
Epler says he'll be meeting Congressman Messmer on July 22nd. He says people can view the painting until September. In Evansville, Deontay Bush, Eyewitness News.
Find the right freelance service right away.
A nice, sultry, kind of close day in Evansville. Some people couldn't make it today because of the heat, but we certainly appreciate all who've made it today. So we're going to begin today with prayer, and Mr. Jack Buttram will lead us in prayer. Please, all who can stand, please rise for our prayer.
Thank you for letting me be here. This was a challenge to me to put together a prayer on the 250th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence. I tried to do it, and we'll see how it goes. But I do want to tell you that courtesy of the military, there are 134 grave sites, cemeteries in the world, with over 150,000 people buried. That we owe. Let us bow in prayer. Thank you for this day, a time of celebration, as we look forward to a 250-year anniversary of our Declaration of Independence. Help us, Father, to understand and appreciate that on July the 4th, 1776, 58 men representing 13 small colonies signed a document declaring a separation from their fatherland, and by doing so committed an act of treason subject to death. As we pledge our allegiance to our flag and our country today, help us to understand and appreciate also those many who have followed their dedication to our country by giving their lives to save our nation. To win World War II, our American military lost over 500,000 Americans. And we have buried them in over 140,000 cemeteries in separate cemeteries around the world. Our Declaration of Independence was a wonderful act of courage committed by 58 men. In your holy name we pray our appreciation. Amen.
Amen.
Yeah, and we keep your standing up, and we'll do the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty
and justice for all.
Who is going to lead us in? Tom, hi. Come up. Come up.
Please join me in the singing of our national anthem. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the Father's casting, whose broad stars and bright stars through the perilous fight on the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare now are bursting in air. They proved through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
You got a good voice. Tom Withers.
Thank you for coming today. This is a real special day, close to our 250th anniversary, as Jack said so well in his prayer. I got several announcements. We go to our main speaker. Kenny, can you come up front? Mr. Kenny Elpers is our artist. And this was on TV last night. You just saw what was on TV, but he created that piece of art, and him and Nancy Sanderson talked to Congressman Messmer, who's been here a couple times, and he's on the way to D.C. with that picture. What's the name of that picture, Kenny? The Enduring Spirit, and that got 3 youngsters. He teaches our kids that come here artwork. He's got a lot of his own work here. He's been a superb volunteer here, and we can't give him enough credit. Okay, next guy, come over here. This guy is Jim Miller, and he's been a good friend of ours for a long time. He helps run a museum in Newburgh, okay? Newburgh in Warwick County is becoming is the highest growing population in the last 2 decades. He's going to tell us something about his museum.
I'd like to invite everyone to visit our newly expanded and refurbished Newburgh Museum at 503 State Street in Newburgh, Indiana. Our hours are Friday, Saturday, 12 to 4, Sunday, 12 to 3. It's a beautiful little place. It just blows our own one away. So please come and visit us. Okay? Admission's free. You don't have to pay. But if you want to donate something, you can. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. All right, next week on the agenda is a lady named Kathy Sylvia. She was the first woman to graduate from West Point. So, you know, women separated 1919 or 20 or so. Just women have been England a year or 2 ahead of time, but you know, women haven't given you a fair shake. But she's going to talk about some tough shakes in the military. The Navy started a couple years after the Army did. Army's got more and always ahead of the Navy and always ahead of everything else. But you should hear her and tell your women friends to come listen to her. And then we got Donna Bone on Wild and Weird World War II stories that could change to Mr. Light, who ran Light Pharmacy here in town, was our biggest pharmacy. Then Man to the Moon by Mandy Scurry. But you got one of these, if you look at it and you call on the bottom, make sure you RSVP so we can order these meals. Now, there's another handout on the front desk that we had, and I'm going to just summarize it. We got 3 fly-ins this summer. You're lucky, and you don't even realize it, to have fly-ins, to have World War II planes, Vietnam era aircraft coming in. The first set is July 10th, 11th, and 12th. That's next weekend. Is that right, next weekend? Yeah, okay, next weekend. And that will have the C-47 here. The C-47 was dropped over 50,000 parachuters over a 4-day period of time at D-Day. That plane did this to aircraft traffic. 1936, aircraft traffic like that. 1936, it went up like that because of this plane. It was a DC-3. It's the same plane that had our college kids in it. But it will hold about 19 customers that pay. So prior to that, you only could pay for 12 seats from the Ford plane. But
The tri-motor.
tri-motor, okay, the tri-motor, okay. But it revolutionized aircraft. Now the kids can fly on this at a reasonable price. They can also look at it. You can tell them the story about D-Day. Now, they don't know a lot of this stuff. So you've got youngsters and other generations that can come out here and say that's what you want as a gift for something. Then you can take them to McDonald's or wherever you want to, but you gotta do some of this stuff. And it's up to you to educate them. Once you get her, these red shirts will educate them, but they need to know, and they know firsthand. Now the second plane that's coming is July 29th and 30th. Now that's a B-20 number. There's not hardly any cities in the world. A friend of mine from Seattle, he asked me 4 times, is that true? Are we getting a B-20 number? I said, yes, it's true. We luckily got it. Now the B-29, there were 1,600 made in World War II, and one was Enola Gay, and the other one was Boxcar. That's the first one Hiroshima, the next one Nagasaki. They had to change the way the bombs were put in there because only fit 1 bomb each, and I think they're about 10,000 pounds. And when an LST admiral came here and talked about 10 years ago, and I didn't video him, but he said he talked to Tibbetts in the lounge at, I guess, Saipan or Tinian. The Tinian was our gas stop over there, but he said when they turned around, he said that plane shook so much he knew it was going to break apart because they dropped the bomb and they ran. And when they ran, he said that thing shook so bad, Tibbetts, but it didn't break apart, and they were able to land. That plane's got 150,000 rivets, just like our town size, and the other plane that's coming in has 600,000 rivets. Now that plane dropped the atom bomb, and I will tell you, I asked nurses, I asked other people, when did the atom bomb drop? Well, in 1965 over in Da Nang. Now you think I'm kidding? I quit asking because I got too depressed. That has changed civilization, the nuclear attack. And if anybody gets a hold of it, we're all dead. If the wrong person gets ahead of it. And these kids don't know what it is. And it's your fault. Yeah, it's your fault. If you don't get out here for that plane, let them get up in it, and you tell them about it, it's your fault. I'm not going to take credit. Your fault. Kids need to know this stuff. I'm asking these people, they're educated people, and they never get it in school because there's not enough time. They got to pass I-STEP. You heard I-STEP? They got to pass that. You can't get history in there. That's not an I-STEP. Science, technology, engineering, and math. Okay, that's not one of them. It's got to be between those. All right, so that's 29, 30, 29, 30. Then I want to see you out here. I won't find you to get mad at you, but I would like to see you out here. Then about a week and a half after that, in the middle of August, you have a Vietnam helicopter. It's been here a couple of times, the most popular of all. You get about 6 people on one side, 6 people on the other. They fly around the city like you did in Vietnam. So it's a Huey and it holds in, and it's very safe. All these are safe planes. You can fly in the first plane I said for about $100 or $200. The second plane, the B-29, you can fly in it for probably $3,000 or $4,000, which is out of everybody's price range, but or most people's anyway. But that second plane, you can climb in it between its flights for $20. So that's what the kids need to do. They don't need to fly in it. But just so you know, nobody in this country gets a B-29. There's only 2 left in the world, Fifi and Dot. One of them's coming here. I'm gonna quit preaching. This gentleman right here, come on up here. This guy, I knew his uncle. I took care of his uncle named Marion Saalman. You come on up here. And this is Stephen Saalman. He's from the Tell City area. He's going to talk about his dad and mom that were in World War II. Now, he's going to go the whole hour. So if you got to go to the bathroom or you want to leave, just get out of here. And you can take off and he's not going to feel bad, okay? Also, if it's too emotionally difficult for you, you walk out, okay? He's going to talk about some tough stuff. It's real, but some tough stuff. So you walk out if it's emotionally too much for you, all right? Now, this guy does a ton for Perry County. I can't tell you how much he does for Perry County. And his dad was the major, and he taught over there for 40 years. He taught this, what he's going to talk about, and he resurrected it. So we are so lucky to have him. He'll tell you the story.
Sorry, I got neuropathy. I have to sit. All right.
Testing back in the back. Can you hear him, McKay?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Okay. Now, I want to introduce myself. My name is Stephen Saalman. I am the Perry County historian. I'm also the curator at both of our museums in the county. And if you're up that way, contact me and I can give you a tour. Now, first of all, I want to thank Dr. Browning and the Evansville War Museum for having me here today to give you this talk. And it's great to see so many people come to these events that really have an interest in history. Now, before I begin, I want to mention something personal. Some parts of what I'm about to share are difficult for me to talk about. I may become emotional at times, so I may need a moment to compose myself. I appreciate your patience and understanding. Both of my parents were World War II veterans. Both of my parents were World War II veterans. My father, oldest Edward Saalman, survived the Batann Death March and endured 3.5 years as a prisoner of war under the Japanese. His experiences are documented in books, including Corregidor, The Saga of a Fortress, and The History of the U.S. Marine Corps, Pearl Harbor to Guadalcanal, and a few other publications. But he wasn't the only. Now, he wasn't the only prisoner of war in my family. My father's great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, Christian Reinhardt Saalman, was captured during the Civil War and imprisoned at the notorious Confederate prison camp in Andersonville, Georgia. He died there on July 26, 1864. Today, the National POW Museum at Andersonville honors the stories of both my great-great-grandfather and my father. My mother, Agnes Lawrence Saalman. She also served during World War II. She was an Army nurse who served on the front lines during the Battle of the Bulge. Later, she was in the first group of nurses during the liberation of the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, the same camp where Anne Frank died. Now, my father, a 24-year-old Army lieutenant, met my mother, a 22-year-old nurse, at a dance at Fort Sill in Lawton, Oklahoma in 1939. My mother was born and raised nearby there after her parents moved to Oklahoma from Perry County during the land rush era. By a remarkable coincidence, my father was from Branchville, Indiana, just 3 miles from her former parents' home. They immediately connected, and on July 4th, 1941, they were married. They were married at Mineral Wells, Texas, at a military wedding. A few weeks later, on August 15th, my father reported for duty with the 4th Marines and was shipped directly to the Philippines. My mother accompanied him to the Presidio in San Francisco, where he boarded the President Cleveland. She later recalled watching the ship sail out of San Francisco Bay from the Golden Gate Bridge. Little did she know, it would be over 4 years before she ever knew what happened to him. After arriving in the Philippines, my father was assigned to General Douglas MacArthur's staff and arranged for my mother to join him in Manila. He secured a nursing position for her at the General Hospital there. My mother had originally booked passage for November 27th, but her departure was delayed until December 7th. While waiting to leave, she stayed with her brother Henry at his home in Beverly Hills. On December 6th, the day before the attack on Pearl Harbor, my father called and told her not to come. The next morning, Henry woke up with the shocking news that Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. Soon afterward, her mother, Mary Belvalorant, called in a panic and begged her to return home to Oklahoma. The following day, as my mother boarded the train back to Oklahoma, a blackout was in effect because a Japanese submarine was shelling the Pacific coast. On December 8, 1941, the Japanese invaded the Philippines. My father remained there until the islands fell, and he was captured on May 6, 1942. During his imprisonment in Japanese prison camps, his weight dropped from 170 pounds to just 92 pounds. When General Douglas MacArthur returned to liberate the Philippines in October 1944, the Japanese evacuated nearly 4,000 prisoners from the island ahead of the invasion. Only 235 lived to tell the tale, and my father was lucky enough to be one of them. Now I'm going to read my father's speech that he delivered to the American Legion in Ferdinand, Indiana in 1974. I was lucky to find it. About 8 years ago, a distant relative told me that her son, an Army captain, had a copy of his speech on a cassette. At the time, he was stationed in Afghanistan and had taken it with him. She explained that he would play it, recording for his soldiers under his command to give them courage before they went out on patrol. It took me a couple months to transcribe the recording. It is deeply moving and at times difficult to hear, but portions may be hard to digest, and I believe it is worth sharing. Here it is. I have been asked by many of my friends and my newspapers all over the country for a complete story of the campaign of the Philippines and the fateful years of prison life which followed. At first, I felt very reluctant to talk about it, but upon reconsidering, I feel it might be well to let the American people know the fate that befell several thousand American soldiers due to the lack of preparedness, and of the American people to realize the value of security, of not having a large, well-trained army. This is the fate that could have happened to your own son, your husband, your brother, or could happen again. It happened to your brother, son, or happen again if we go back to the idea that large military force is not necessary. Now, back in the 1930s, when World War II began, the United States became a pacifist nation. We took our battleships that we had out in the ocean and sunk them. We disbanded our army, and actually, in 1932, the Army of the United States was roughly 6 to 9 times larger than the police force of New York City's 135,000 personnel. Now compare that to the 9 million in the German forces, and 7 million in the Japanese service, and 3 million in the Italian service. Now here we were, a country, one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and one of the freest countries in the world, with a military force that could do nothing. And we didn't. It is no wonder that people such as Adolf Hitler, Tojo, and Benito Mussolini, those who were greedy with power, hungry with power, saw their opportunity and took advantage of it. If this country had kept a strong military force back through all the 1930s, we would have never had World War II. They would have not acted. They would have been afraid to. If that happened, all those billions of dollars spent to fight World War II would have been utilized for something more important and more beneficial to mankind, but it wasn't. Of course, if it hadn't been, or if it had been, we wouldn't be here or having the memory we have of World War II. Just think of the lives that could have been saved if we would have kept a strong military force. I was one of the unfortunate individuals who helped pay the real price for that unpreparedness. I was in the Philippines quite some time before World War II began. I was young. I was ignorant. I was more adventurous than anything else. I thought this would be a great chance to get some excitement, and I had my share of it before it was all over. Little did I realize how unprepared we were. So when war began, we had plans of what was going to happen in case the Japanese attacked the Philippines. They would have been drawn up as early as 1936 by General Douglas MacArthur. The plan was just exactly what we followed. The only thing wrong, plans don't always work out. The plan was that if we could hold out for 6 weeks in the Philippines, help would arrive from Hawaii in time to save our hides. But little did we realize at the time, the United States Navy was going to be completely wiped out at Pearl Harbor, and there would not be enough ships to get through safely with any troops or any supplies to the Philippines. So as a result, that help had not arrived. Now the situation in the Philippines was like this. We were to hold 6 weeks. The Japanese made their invasion, and their plan was to take us in 3 weeks. Rather, that plan worked out. We held out for 5 months, and this hurt their feelings. Now I'm going to talk a little harsh about the Japanese. I want to tell you this before I say too much. I have forgiven them, but I have not forgotten. There are some who may question, why are you telling this story? We're at peace. The Japanese have changed their attitude. They are a peaceful nation, and that's just fine. But the Japanese government has never apologized to any of us and to our government for what happened to the troops who are in the Philippines. And until they do, I'll keep telling this story. I think people should know it, and I'm not ashamed to tell it. I'm glad to tell it. But I want to let you know, I have forgiven them. Now to begin with, we held out longer than they expected. This upset their whole plan in the Far East. They did have plans, and this had come to light in later years. They had plans of taking Australia. This was their next step. They had already taken Singapore, Hong Kong, and Java. They had already taken some of the islands around us, between us and Australia. But there was only one place left, and that was the Philippines. And thinking they could just go through us quickly and get on their way to Australia, they started landing within a few days after Pearl Harbor, and 5 months later, they were still bogged down. Now, we had no equipment compared to them. The equipment we had was one World War I equipment. We had one regiment that was armed with M1 rifles. That's the latest rifle we had. Our helmets were all World War I helmets. Everything else were of World War I vintage. We did not have enough metals to obtain supplies for a prolonged siege. We had just stockpiled enough in the Philippines for what the plan called for, 6 weeks. The plan was for us to withdraw from and get out of Manila and retire from that open city and withdraw to a peninsula called Batann. And that's what we did. And we took enough food and supplies, which was all we had, to last another 6 weeks. Well, you can see the predicament we were in. After about 2 months, 3 months went by with insufficient food, insufficient medical supplies, and insufficiencies in everything you can think of. And frankly, we had to send out foraging parties to find whatever they could that was edible. This included monkeys, dogs, cats, rats, grasshoppers, and other insects. And it even included snakes. The 26th Cavalry that we had with us, it also included their horses. And it was the last horse cavalry unit this country ever had. And I hate to say, I helped eat it. You know, this may sound terrible, but your stomach sort of rebels at eating monkey, especially after it's skinned. It looked almost like a little baby being put in a boiling pot. When you have nothing else, that's what you had. We were on half rations for a long time. Then we got down to third rations. Now, most of you veterans know what a military ration is. It's a supply you normally eat, and you get down where you eat just half of that. Then you get down to where you eat just a third of it. Then you got down to where you only had a sixth of it. Many of us fell sick. We were suffering from malaria. We had no medicine. Our quinine supply was the only thing we had at the time for malaria, but it had disappeared. It was gone. And in delirium, you sat in your foxhole and fought a battle with 100 to 102 degree fever all day long, being very sick. But we had to do it. How we managed to do it, I don't know how we did it, but we did. Now, the organization which I belonged to was the 57th Infantry Philippine Scouts. It was all Filipino scouts, some of the best seasoned troops that were there. We were used as shock troops in the same way like in Vietnam, the Green Berets were used. We were continuously being pulled from one place to another. Wherever the Japanese would break through our lines, we would dig in to take our place and move them out and push them out. For 5 months, we were able to do it, but it took a heavy toll, especially being a white person assigned to the Philippines. We stood out like a sore thumb, and our losses amongst the officer personnel were very heavy. It makes you shudder a little bit, like when we were sitting on a big bank during the lull and the fighting, 3 of us sitting together, and all at once the guy in the middle, his head is blown off, with blood pouring out of his neck hole. And it was very discouraging when in one day's time, after seeing the number of company commanders that were killed, there were 4 company commanders in my battalion, and 3 of them were killed, and I became company commander. You start to realize your turn may be next. But I have always acknowledged since then, I have found somewhat feelings, like when your time comes, it will come, and not before. Finally, the end of the fighting came. It had to come. There was no way around it. The surrender of Batann was on April 8, 1942. We didn't know what it was going to be like. I'm afraid if we did, not too many of us were equipped for what we were going to suffer. I don't know what we would have done, but we would have done something else. We were starting to be rounded up. All of our weapons were destroyed. The Japanese came through and searched us, took our money, our billfold, our pictures, everything we had, anything of value, our watches and rings and whatnot. We were lined up and started on a march. Now, part of them marched 60 miles, part of them marched 80 miles, and part of them marched altogether 120 miles to a little town of Campus and a place called Camp O'Donnell. There has been a book written by a man by the name of Donald Knox. A book written by a man named Donald Knox called The Batann Death March. It's a paperback and it doesn't cost much, but the stories that you read there will give you an idea of what it was like. And here's a sampling of what I saw from one day. I was on a path and never had a drink of water. Water was running on both sides of the road, and there wasn't a drop to drink. If you stepped out of line and took a drink of water, you were shot. If you passed out, just fainting, thirst or whatnot, you were shot. If you fell off the wayside, there was a group of Japanese soldiers that would come up behind you, and they would run a bayonet up your ass or stick a bayonet through you and just go off and leave you lay. It was great enjoyment for them. For us, it was one of the most miserable situations that mankind could ever endure. Now myself, I was only on it for about 2.5 days. That's all I could take. On the evening of the second day, I crawled out. It being dark, I headed to the jungle along with a good friend of mine, where we found some guerrillas, and we headed back south to where we had started. We finally found a boat and got to the island of Corregidor, which was still holding out, and did hold out for another month. On Corregidor, I was assigned to the 4th Marines. I commanded an attachment of Marines, and I was the company commander of the last Battle of Corregidor. The Japanese began the shelling, the softening up process of the island, although they had been doing it for some time. But on April 28th, we knew the next day was going to be a rough one. It was the Emperor's birthday. The birthday celebration marked the beginning of a period when the enemy bombarded the island without let up, day and night. They had 150 batteries set up on one side of Corregidor. They had 150 batteries set up on one side of they had 150 batteries set up on one side of Corregidor from the main island of Luzon, 75 batteries set up on the other side, plus hundreds and hundreds of airplanes overhead. They would drop their bombs. I don't know how many battleships they had out to sea, which were continuously shelling us. I've seen movies that they made at the bombardment of Corregidor, and it's almost like looking at a movie ad. And you wonder how a person could survive. All right? And there were times when at midday, it was almost like it was dark. The sun was completely blotted out. And during the night, you couldn't tell if it was dark out because the exploding shells kept the skies completely lit up. Life on the rock became a living hell. It became virtually impossible to move about the island by daylight. Enemy artillery spotters aloft in observation balloons on Batann and in planes overhead had a clear view of their targets. The dense vegetation that once covered most of Corregidor was stripped away by blast and fragmentation. In one day, May the 2nd, it was estimated that for 5 straight hours, between 3,500 and 4,240 millimeter artillery shells had fallen on Corregidor. The island like it was beaten and burnt to a crisp. But actually, there was very few people killed because if you were down in a foxhole of any kind, your chances of survival was very good. The Japanese were confident that their preparatory bombardment had knocked out most of the fight of the Corregidor. Our biggest desire was having something to eat. We did have adequate water supply on Corregidor, but we still lacked adequate food. We were still hungry. After 30 days of bombing and 30 days of fighting, on the morning of May the 6th, after heavy shelling, I remember we had one long searchlight and reached out over Manila Bay. And just a little before daybreak, about 4 in the morning, which was their dawn, all you could see was nothing but landing barges full of thousands of Japanese troops coming straight towards Corregidor. Well, with that knowledge of their coming and to see them mass and coming strong, all we could do was start shooting. We had one 105 millimeter artillery gun left that was in operation, and we were about out of ammunition for it. All you had to do was fire at point blank range. In other words, you didn't figure distance, you just aimed in the general direction, and you couldn't hardly miss anything when you fired because they were that close together and coming right at us. I remember when daylight came and looking out over Manila Bay, between there and Batann Peninsula, my remarking to my battalion commander, I really believe we could walk all the way to Batann on the dead bodies floating in the water. The Japanese commander, General Masahara Homa, had actually sent word calling off the invasion because of the severe outbreak of malaria in their ranks. And the master commanding Japanese officer said General Homa had sent word out for his troops to come home, thinking he couldn't take it. Well, he was wrong. His troops had already landed, but it didn't matter. We couldn't have repelled them. We were out of supplies. I think we had about 3 or 4 days of food left. They had landed their tanks, and we had nothing to fight tanks with, not a single anti-tank gun. Finally, General Wainwright had come out waving a white flag. Now when they captured us this time, we were put inside Malinta Tunnel. If you see it right in the middle there, right when the net goes off, right at the angle for Malinta Tunnel there. And they put tanks across the entrance, the flamethrowers on them, and they finally forced General Wainwright to surrender all the troops in the Philippines, which he was forced to do. And that ended the war as far as we were concerned. Then came 3.5 years of struggling, from torture and starvation, just to survive. We were taken off the island of Corregidor and taken to Manila, then paraded down the street. The entire rank of sickly, unshaven, unkempt, dirty, filthy squads of soldiers. No chance to bathe, no chance to shave, and not much chance to eat. And they let the Filipinos look at us. Japanese thought this would humiliate us. It did, but it didn't do what they thought it would do. They were wanting to win the respect of the Filipino people, but it didn't do it. Young kids, Filipino kids, ran out in the line of march and gave us cups of water, and gave us cigarettes, and some of them waving and saying, "God bless America." And it got to the point where the Japanese couldn't stand it any longer, and they made them all disperse and go home. We were then taken to a prison in a camp called Cabana Tuan, and there we were kept for about 5 months. The death rate, starvation from disease were amounted to at one day, we had as high as 70 died. And it was usually 15 to 20 a day. There was no burying process except for a big hole in the ground. And each day he carried out the dead and threw them in this hole. Then threw just a little bit of dirt over them, just to cover them. The next morning he brought in more dead and more dirt until it was filled up. And then we dug another hole. I don't know how many holes we dug. There was usually 400 to 500 men buried in each hole. We tried to keep some record of who was being buried in these mass graves, but there was no way of identifying most of these bodies. The food was rice, 2 cups full a day. I hate rice today. I hate rice mainly because I never had enough of it. Everyone in there, every once in a while they gave us a weed that we made soup out of. It tasted horrible. We had no salt. We had no seasoning of any kind. Just plain rice, day after day after day. And half the time there was maggots in the rice. But you ate it anyway because you had nothing else. At one point, we had several men with dengue fever and diphtheria that broke out in the camp, and we had no medication. Somehow or other, through the grapevine, the Filipinos had attached word to Manila that there was enough dengue fever and diphtheria here, and a Catholic priest in Manila, who was a German, an ally of Japan, came to the prison camp with the diphtheria antitoxin. He went to the Japanese commander and asked him, please let him give this to the American doctors. The Japanese commander took the vials of medicine and threw them on the ground, stomped on them, and broke every one of them. His reply was, I don't care how many died. The priest was taken out, and nobody heard of him again. Now, at this particular time, in October 1942, there was a request made for those who could walk and were strong enough to go on a detail. They would take 1,000 of us on into an island called Mindanao, 800 miles south of the Philippines. I thought the situation could not be any worse there than where I was, so I was one of the volunteers that went. Now, 1,000 of us were put in a ship. In the hole we were put down in, it was about 100 by 200 feet. 1,000 of us rammed in there, and there was standing room only. We had no clothes, we had no shoes, everything was gone. The only thing you had in the way of clothing was a G-string or your underpants. Now you manipulate it around until you could stretch out by having everybody in a row we were in to spread their legs out and straddle between each other's legs and stretch out and lay there for a half an hour or so. Then it would be somebody else's turn. And remember, there was no toilet facilities. And where you were laying is where all your waste ended up, underneath of you. In a week it took for us to get to 800 miles. By the time we got there, it was about 3 feet deep all over the floor. We were covered in it. The stench was unbearable, and with it came the flies. They were swarming and biting, leaving welts all over your body. It was also very hot in there. We had no water to drink. Some men became so thirsty that they passed out. Some of them died. We finally arrived on the island of Mindanao and sent to a camp about 50 miles north in the middle of the jungle from a town called POW. And we were put in what was then a penal colony for Filipino convicts. They turned the Filipino convicts loose, but kept a few of them there to show us how to work. And the rest of them, I don't know what they did with them. But when those Filipinos had been sentenced there before the war, they were able to bring their families with them, and they were assigned a house. But they couldn't get away because of nearly 50 miles of jungle in every direction. It made it almost impossible to get through. But anyway, while we were there, the treatment was better. We managed to pull ourselves together by working on details on the outside of the prison fence. We could eat better. It wasn't because we were given more food, it's because we were finding food out of our details and getting what was available to us. Now we became quite experts at stealing food. And sometimes we talked the guards into letting us have some extra food, like papaya fruit, growing on the outside, and bananas. We helped grow bananas. And we planted rice and kept a little bit of it hidden on us each time we went out to work. And we worked in the rice paddies. You waded in the water up to your knees all day long. We worked about 12 hours a day, sometimes 14 hours, just to get the job done. I had to drive an old caribou, sort of like an oxen, with a plow. And you travel about 1 mile an hour plowing the ground and planting rice. I know some of you have seen pictures of some of those rice fields and how it's done. And I did that day in and day out, many, many, many days. You sort of learned while working how to take care of yourself. Anytime you had a chance to get a hold of anything else to eat, you took advantage of it. I remember one time when I was helping dig a ditch, some of the old Filipino convicts had been in there, had raised some chickens. And sometimes the chickens would get inside the prison tents. On this day, we were digging this ditch, and this old hen got into the prison yard. I told my buddy, I'll keep an eye on the guard, and you do something like cut your foot a little bit and hop around and act like you're hurt real bad. You get that prisoner guard's attention, and I'll get that chicken. Well, he did. He started yelling and got the guard's attention. The guard went over to see what was the matter with him. And I took my shovel, I hit that hen over the head as hard as I could. I had an old rag I kept around my shoulder to keep from getting sunburned. And I wrapped the hen up in this rag, and I dug out a little hole there in the sand and buried it. I planned on later, when we were done with the work that day, I would come by and pick up that chicken and see if I could smuggle it into camp. Well, we went back to work, and I looked out of the corner of my eye, and there was a chicken had come to. It was jumping up and down with sand, and the sand was going up and down. The guard walked right by it. I didn't know what to do. While the guard was looking the other way, I jumped out of formation and started jumping up and down on the old hen, and it stopped. I went back to work. Later that afternoon, I went by there, and I scooped up the rag with the chicken, and I stuck it under my arm, and like it wasn't anything. We got to the gate, and of course, they would search you. If they found anything on you, they would beat the heck out of you, usually breaking both of your arms. I started to walk through the gate, and this little short guard came up along with a big tropical helmet on. I got in the middle between two men, with one on each side of me. When the guard got to me, I just grabbed the rag, held it up over his head. He checked my pants and walked on to the next guy. I walked right on through the gate. Of course, I got the chicken in, but the next thing we had to do was figure out how to cook it. You can't imagine how deprived we were of everything, how valuable anything was when you have nothing. We found some paper. Then one guy had a tin can. Tin cans were especially valuable because you could make a homemade knife out of it for yourself. And of course, over several weeks that we had been there on these work details, you could bring in things like that, and everybody sort of had a monopoly on certain things. This one guy had a large tin can, and he'd rent this can out to you for so much food. By the time I got the chicken, I had to find somebody who had these things. One guy had some charcoal, and I had to hire a couple guys to guard the watch because you didn't want Jack to see you while you were cooking. By the time we got the chicken cooked, I had 9 men that participated in the meal. It was so good. In fact, it tasted like the best chicken we'd ever had in our life. At that time, we even ate the bones. There was another experience I had in getting extra food. The Japanese had picked a lot of venereal disease, and they had gone to see American doctors who had sulfa drugs, and they were short on supplies. And they were always asking us if we had sulfa drugs or where they could get some. And then one day, one of them asked me, "Can you get sulfa drug for me?" I said, "No, but I will try for you. What's one worth to you?" He said, "If you give me one, I'll give you a whole bucket of rice and fish." I said, "Well, I'll try." He said, "I'll be back on the same detail tomorrow. Let me know." I said, "Okay." I went back in and talked to one of my buddies, and he said, "I have a solution to that. I know a boy down here who's got a can of foot powder. Let's make him a pill." So we set up a miniature pill making company, and we turned out some very decent looking pills. They even had the check mark on them and everything. I took one out and gave it to him, and he gave me the bucket of rice and fish, and everything went really well for 3 or 4 weeks. I was getting lots of friends because I had food to share. We were all gaining weight. I was the only one that had anything to eat. But one day, he didn't show up. And this went on for several days. He didn't show up. And I was getting a little hungry. And the guard that replaced him, I walked out and asked him, "Hey, what happened to Hot Tie?" He replied, "He got very sick. He in hospital. He died." Well, poor fella, I felt so sorry for him. Any trick that you could play on them to get a hold of extra food, we did. I'm not going to all the details of things we did. I can talk all night and tell you more stories. We were there for 2.5 years. In this one particular camp, We had very few escape, but there were times that somebody would escape. And they had to punish somebody else, usually by a severe beating, usually by broken both arms and legs, and usually the victim died within a couple of days. But we survived it, and it wasn't long until we heard that the Americans were landing at some of the islands south of us. And you want to know how we knew this? We had a fellow in our group that was an expert in radio, and he worked on the radios for the Japanese, and he'd steal parts, and eventually he stole enough parts to make his own radio. And he did it very cleverly, and he would hide the parts. He made the radio in the bottom of his canteen with a false bottom where it was hidden. The top still had his water, and you couldn't tell the bottom had a radio. He always stood along one part of the south wall every night about 9:30. He would pick up a broadcast, and he tuned into the Voice of Freedom in Australia. And we got the news in English every night at 9:30, and we knew what was going on all over the world. And that was certainly the biggest morale booster that we had. And we got the news before the Japanese did. When Italy surrendered, we got the news a day ahead of the Japanese. Now, when the Japanese got the news like that, it was usually about a month old. They had to go through their propaganda machine, and they delayed in passing it down, especially if it was bad news. But they heard us talking about it, and they didn't believe it. They thought we were just trying to pull the wool over their eyes about Italy. But 3 weeks later, they found out it was true. This made them very mad, thinking that something funny was going on here. They wanted to know how we could have known this 3 weeks ago. So one night they raided our barracks about midnight and made us all get out of bed. They stripped us and made us all stand at attention until daybreak. They went through everything there was in that prison camp looking for that radio because they knew we had one. And there it was, hanging on the wall right in front of them, and they never did find it. And we used that radio all the way up until the end. In October 1944, we found out the Americans were landing in the Philippines on Leyte. We got the news that night. We were so excited. You can't imagine how elated we were. The Japs decided we weren't going to be happy about the news. So they decided to move us out to the Philippines ahead of the American invasion. After the invasion started, we were taken back to Batann, where we started from 2.5 years ago. We were there for just a few months, and things had gotten a little better for everybody because so many of the soldiers in that camp had died, and they were able to take care of many less prisoners. There were 3,650 of us that were still walking. The rest were too sick to be moved. About 1,000 were just so bedridden they couldn't hardly be moved. So they took us back to Manila, and they were going to load us with half the men, or 1,800 each, into 2 ships and move us out on 2 different days. I was in the first group, and there was this other group. If you could trade places, you could. They wouldn't allow it. It so happened, most of my close friends and best friends were going in the second group. So I tried all night to get somebody from the second group to come over into the first group to trade places with me. But I couldn't find anybody that wanted to trade. The next morning, just as I was going out the gate to load onto the ship, I was 20 steps from the gate. And once you passed the gate, there was no turning back. Then one guy I knew from New Mexico asked me if I still wanted to trade. I said, yes, I do. I stepped out of line, and he stepped right into my place. He went right onto the gate, and that was it. That ship was sunk by American bombers the next day. All 2,000 men aboard were lost to sea. The Americans didn't know the American POWs were on that ship, but it was like God was watching over me. Now that ship that I went on was called the Orinoco Maru. It left Manila a few days later with 1,850 prisoners. Plus there were several thousand Japanese civilians on board in the upper deck. It was a very big ship, one of the biggest passenger liners in the Japanese service. We were put in the bottom hold. It was very hot, very suffocating, and the air was really hot. In fact, we had almost no air at all, nothing. We left that evening, got in Lingayen Gulf in the middle of the night. The air was so bad, men were passing out. We were suffocating, plus we had no water, and men were fainting because of thirst. Now, I knew what it was like to travel on these ships because, like I told you, I had done it before. I knew what the situation was going to be like. So while I went on there, I carried a canteen of water on me. Others didn't have any. I got over into a corner of the bottom of the hole in a far, far corner. I knew that's where the air would be the best, and I lay down on the floor. Late that night, men started going crazy. Now this is a part that's hard to believe and hard to tell, but it happened. We actually had people that went thirst crazy. Almost all of us were armed with knives. Many men lost their minds and crawled about in the absolute darkness, armed, attempting to kill people in order to drink their blood. We had some of these men who went completely crazy with thirst, slicing the throats of some of their best friends standing next to them and drinking their blood. They even cut their own blood vessels. They drank their own blood. Men began drinking their own urine. Now these men had reached the breaking point and beyond. They could not help themselves. They didn't know what they were doing. This frenzy continued on until about 10 o'clock the next morning, when the American dive bombers bombed our ship. They didn't know we were aboard. And one of the bombs came right into the hole, and when it exploded, it threw men's arms, legs, blood, and intestines everywhere. Nearly every man was covered in blood. The explosion tore open the sides of the ship, but it did let in air, and it started letting in cool water. There were about 800 or 900 men, or about half of us were killed. And those of us who were still alive started to get out. There was only one rickety ladder for us to get out, with hundreds of men standing at the bottom. I looked at that ladder, and the ship was also on fire. I thought there had to be a way to get out of here, because there were too many of us climbing that same ladder. But there was a steel beam that had dropped down the center of the hole. It was perpendicular with the wall and just barely leaning against it. I went to it, but I was so weak, I couldn't hardly stand up. I looked at that steel beam. I wondered if it's possible to climb it. I don't know where the energy came from, but I climbed that beam like a squirrel. I didn't feel like I had a bit of weight. I didn't have much. Now, just a few minutes before, I was so weak I couldn't even move. I got to the top and went over the side. I found a bamboo pole and picked up two of my buddies who couldn't swim, and we started ashore. We were lucky. We were close to shore. The Japanese made sure that those of us who were heading to shore in one straight direction were let go. Those who swam in other directions were shot in the water. By the time we got to shore, there was only about 600 of us left. We were taken to a tennis court at San Fernando on the north shore of Luzon. We were kept there for about 8 straight days. And during those 8 days, we were never given a bite to eat. And to get water, you had to get in line. And we stayed in line all day long. Because by the time you got a drink, you got back in line because you were thirsty again. And so you just kept in line and took your turn to get a drink out of one little stream of water, just barely driven. After the 8th day, they brought in a truck with 2 sacks of uncooked rice, and they passed it out to us. Every man got about 2 spoons full.
Fingers don't work like they used to.
In the afternoon, they loaded us on trucks and started moving us on our way north. When our truck finally stopped, I looked out and saw some berries growing on the side of the road. I reached out and grabbed a handful of them. Everybody on that side of the truck reached out and grabbed a handful. As it turns out, they were poisonous. And when we reached our destination that night, I was so sick and doubled up in cramps, I felt so bad, I didn't care if they shot me or what they did to me, because I was figuring I was going to die anyway. I really don't know what was going on. When we got to the San Fernando jail, they put us there all night. All of those who were just as sick as I was put off to one side. And the Japanese told our American commander, these prisoners will be taken back to Manila. I was conscious enough to know what was going to happen. So I felt sort of pleased that I might be going back to Manila to a hospital. And I knew the Americans were landing there, some 70 miles south of where we were. During the night though, when I was passed out, a friend of mine came over and grabbed me and pulled me over to his side. When I came to, I found out I was on the other side and I was going on to Japan. And I wasn't going to go back to Manila. I was really mad. Anyhow, I found out after the war that all those sick men were taken out to the cemetery where they were all beheaded and thrown in a hole. The Japanese officer that was responsible for that had his neck stretched after the war at a war crimes tribunal. And I believe God had saved me again. On Christmas Day, 1944, I was on a train crammed into another hot railroad car. Remember, December is their summer. We were headed to the northern part of the island of Luzon. Then on New Year's Day, we were loaded on another ship, and they had just unloaded the Japanese cavalry's horses. They put us down into the hold where these horses had just been, and we had no food. And there were many men that were so desperately hungry, they started going through the horse manure, picking up grains of corn to eat. Just 4 days after we left San Fernando, the American troops landed. We always jokingly said we smelled bacon and eggs when we left. We were then taken to the island of Formosa, which is now called Taiwan. We pulled into harbor, Taiwan, and American dive bombers spotted our ship again, which was, of course, marked with the Imperial Emperor's seal, and they bombed and sunk us again. Over half the prisoners were killed, and nearly 400 dead bodies were left there approximately 1 week. Some of the bodies were fully intact, and some of them were just blown to pieces. If you've ever tried to pick up a dead body in the tropical climate where we were, you didn't pick up the body, you picked it up in pieces. You can't imagine what it was like. The bodies were so thick and had swollen up so that when you touched it with your hand, your fingers would sink into the flesh, and you could only pull out chunks at a time. They were also covered in flies, and looking at those rotted corpses, you could see the maggots crawling out of their eyes and every opening in their bodies. After we cleaned up the bodies, we burned them and buried the remains on the island of Taiwan. And today there's a monument there marking the spot where this happened. Then we loaded on another ship and we started for Japan once more. On this ship we were on, there was another shortage of water. And looking out over the ocean with all the water, and there wasn't any of it that we could drink. I could go on a long time without eating food, but I could hardly go very long without drinking any water. On this particular ship, we had a tarpaulin stretched over us, hanging on poles. The weather began turning very cold. Freezing ice and snow started falling. And you would hold open your mouth, hoping to catch a few flakes, just to have something to drink. We did discover on the ship there were barrels of sugar in the holds below us. By carefully lifting some boards, we made a small opening where you could get down in that hole where the sugar was. We did it for 2 reasons. Because the sugar would give you some energy, and the sacks that contained the sugar could be made into blankets to keep us warm. We were freezing to death because I said all we had was undershorts or G-strings. So we had to keep the sacks hidden during the daytime, and at night we'd cover them up. We'd cover ourselves up with the sacks to keep warm. One day, a Japanese soldier looked down and saw an American digging into the sugar. Immediately, he reported it to his commander, and the commander ordered that man to come forward and to be punished. Nobody knew who the guilty man was for stealing the sugar because we were all guilty. We didn't know who it had been. No one would go forward. They kept insisting that the man must come up and take his punishment. Then the guard, who was in charge of the detail, opened up the hatch and set up a machine gun. He said, "That man must come forward in 5 minutes or we're going to kill all of you." He meant every word of it. He got out his watch. Every minute he told us how much time we had left. In the last minute, the soldiers cocked the machine gun. He then started counting down the last minute. Several times I thought I was going to die, but escaped. But this time I knew for certain I was a goner, along with all the men. And I began to pray. He counted down the last 10 seconds, and his men readied the machine gun. In the last 5 seconds, a very brave man way off in the corner stood up. This man was one of the older soldiers, about 40 years old. He said, "I am the guilty man." Well, this man was like the rest of us. Real long, dirty hair, unkempt, and I didn't recognize him at first, but then I did recognize him. He was taken up, and a rope was placed under his arms, and they took him out on deck and strung him up right in front of us. And they started beating him and broke both of his arms and legs until he died. When he was dead, they untied him and threw his body right back down in the hold with us. His name was Chaplain Francis J. Adams from Cleveland, Ohio, United States Navy. Without any thought of being faithful to God and his fellow man, he laid his life down for the rest of us so we could all live. Because if he hadn't, I wouldn't be here giving you this talk, because we would have all been killed. That Japanese lieutenant that ordered his beating also had his neck stretched at the military tribunal. There were quite a few of them that paid the price and penalty for the war crimes they had committed. We arrived in Japan on my birthday, January 30th, 1945. I was 31 years old. Well, you can't imagine what we looked like, having lived in manure and filth for about 3 months and being sunk twice. We were dirty. Our hair and beards were very long. We had manure caked all over us. We were taken to the prison camp nearby. I was very sick and I was taken to a hospital. I weighed 92 pounds. I weighed 170 pounds when I first went to the Philippines. I was in the hospital for 30 days, which I was given decent treatment. The Japanese commander of this prison camp was very kind to us. He actually shed tears when he saw us. He stated, "I can't believe that my fellow countrymen would treat anyone like this." That Japanese officer became an employee of the United States government in the Army of Occupation, and he rose to a very high rank in the Army. He too was rewarded for his kindness. We all saw to it after the war was over. We testified at his hearing and let them know what he had done for us. In late March, we were all taken to Korea. We were put on a train and rode the train all the way across Korea to Manchuria, 100 miles to the Russian-Siberian border. On August 3rd, the Russian army declared war on Japan, and they came rushing down from the border toward us and crashed the gate with the prison gates with their tanks. There was a Russian lieutenant stuck his head out of the tank and said, "You are all now free, thanks to the Russian army." And he passed out money to all of us. The war was about over, and they knew it. The next morning, a B-29 flew over and dropped supplies to us. There was enough in there to last 50 years. They dropped so many supplies we didn't know what to do with it. And they kept dropping it, wherever they could drop it. We were released and put on a hospital ship and headed back toward the United States. But during all this time, my mother had feared for my father's life. She didn't know if he survived the war or was killed by his captors. The fall of Corregidor Island in the Philippines was mentioned in the papers, but no names were ever attached to the articles. Though deeply depressed, she resumed her job back at the Frederick, Oklahoma hospital. Distraught, she finally realized she had to do something, and that something was to join the military. When she first tried to join, she was turned away because she was still married. Her priest told her he would help her file for enrollment so she could join. She joined the U.S. Army Nurse Corps, enlisted in 1943, and volunteered to go to China, hopefully to be near my father if he was somehow found alive. But instead, my mother was sent to the European theater of operations. The war was raging in Europe, and Army nurses were badly needed there. She and 7 other nurses crossed the Atlantic Ocean early December 1944 on the Queen Elizabeth. There were 17,000 American troops on the ship, and several times they had to dodge enemy U-boats. After landing, she had to carry a 60-pound backpack and wore a steel helmet. She marched 8 miles to the hospital, which was just a tent with cots for the wounded and a large table used for surgery. It was a MASH-type unit. They got a helmet of water daily to wash their hair, clothes, and to bathe. She said eventually the water became so thick she just had to throw it out. She was stationed at the evacuation hospital starting from December 1944. Her unit set up from 1 to 15 miles from the front line. She could hear the bombs exploding when the Battle of the Bulge was raging. Wounded soldiers were coming in so fast they hardly had time to patch them up. She helped do over 200 amputations while the battle was raging. She said she didn't sleep sometimes for over 2 days at a time. Her unit set up on airstrip. As the armies moved so fast, it was difficult to keep up with it. While her unit was stationed in Germany on Easter Sunday, April 1st, 1945, the unimaginable happened. News came that sent shockwaves of disbelief through her mind. A profound mix of joy and sorrow overcame her thoughts all at once. She nearly fainted. A letter postmarked December 1944 in Manila had arrived from my father stating he was still alive. The letter was found in a mail bag that was floating in the Pacific Ocean for over 2 years. It said for 2.5 years he was confined to an old prison and worked in rice fields on an island in the Philippines. They would get him up at 3:30 and they would plant rice all day. The Japanese tortured the prison and fed Americans rice containing bugs. The wonderful news raised her spirits, and it gave her a new sense of determination. Finally, the Battle of the Bulge was over, but she was totally unprepared for what happened next. On April 15, 1945, on April 14th, the British, finally the Battle of the Bulge was over, but she was totally unprepared for what happened next. On April 15th, 1945, with the British 11th Armored Division, she was in the first group of nurses to enter the notorious Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. The first thing she said she witnessed were 3 large piles of humans that had been doused with gasoline and set on fire. She recalled hearing the screams and seeing the arms and legs moving. She said after the flames were established, they only saved 3 victims. More than 13,000 corpses in various stages of decomposition lay unburied on the campground. She said the bodies were a ghastly sight. Some were green, some were gray. She said they looked like skeletons covered with skin. The flesh had all gone. There were bodies of babies and small children among the grown-ups. In other parts of the camp, there were hundreds of bodies laying around, in some cases piled 5 or 6 feet high. Besides that, there were nearly 60,000 emaciated, ill prisoners in desperate need of medical attention. She said they had to thread their way through the dead bodies. There were bodies scattered everywhere. She said she had never seen such horror in all her life. In the days following the arrival of the British Army, more than 13,000 people died as a result of their treatment at the hands of the Nazis. More than 70,000 prisoners, the majority of them were Jewish, were murdered at Bergen-Belsen. The discovery of Bergen-Belsen camp and the horrendous conditions there made a powerful impact on public opinion in the United States and everywhere. The horrors of the camp, documented on film and pictures, made the name Belsen emblematic of Nazi crimes in the immediate post-1945 period. Anne Frank and her sister Margot perished from starvation and typhus at Bergen-Belsen just weeks before it was liberated. Following the liberation of the camp, the building was burnt to the ground to stop the spread of disease. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor brought separation and hardship to my parents for over 4 years. They didn't see each other from August 1941 until 2 months after the war ended. My parents reunited in October that year in Texas and began their life together. They moved back to Perry County in 1954 and reared 9 of us children. They both had successful careers, he in education and her in nursing. I feel an enormous sense of gratitude and appreciation for my parents for having given so much for our country. The public proclaim my gratitude for what they did right and for the positive qualities and values they passed on to us. My father died May 24, 1989. My mother passed on March 16, 2001. Rest in peace, Mom. That's all I have. I want to show you a picture here. This is my father went back to a reunion in 1972 in the Philippines of all the prisoners of war. And this is Ferdinand Marcos. He was the president, later a president of the Philippines. He was a brutal dictator, really. But my father was in the camp with him, and he met him there, and he had the picture taken with him. And another thing I didn't mention, when the war broke out, my dad was in charge of the secret codes, they were passing to Manila. And one day he had secret codes he had to take to Manila to deliver to their headquarters. And he got there, and the guy that met him there was Governor Whitcomb of Indiana, who ended up being a prisoner of war too after that. And that's another little detail I left out.
You're good.
That's it. That's all I had.
That's President Marco. Thank you. That's absolutely superb. Unbelievable. Thank you, Stephen, for doing that. Now, this is the most important part of this, even though yours is important too. We're going to have questions and answers. So start thinking of them. We got a microphone with Mr. Jason there and Kirk over here. So You just raise your hand, you get a microphone, you gotta leave, go ahead and leave. You gotta go to the bathroom, go and leave. But we're still gonna ask questions, okay? First thing on this, Fernando, did he give anybody shoes? I think his wife had 6,000 pair of shoes.
Yeah, okay, I didn't understand what you were saying.
Okay, his wife had 6,000 pair of shoes. Did she give any shoes to the guys that were at this exchange?
I doubt it. They're pretty greedy with their stuff.
You gotta talk into it, like this, that's it.
Okay. Unfortunately, I got a call from the VA about the time you got started. And I was wondering, are they going to have a transcript of what you just said so I could read the whole thing? Because I missed probably 6 or 7 minutes of it.
I'll tell you what, I'll give you this copy I have with me.
Okay.
Because I've got it on the computer at home and I can print it out anytime.
Okay, thank you very much.
First of all, we'll make a copy for you. We have a copy in our archives, and all of these are videoed and they're up on our website and should be available within 15 to 30 days. So you can rehear if you want to hear this or anything in the past 3 or 4 years. But you have to go to our website. You have to ask for the talker. You have to have a little bit of sense. Don't go to Google everywhere. Just go to our website and then search. Okay, next question over here, down there. Okay, tell your name and get the microphone straight.
How are you related to Saalman?
Yeah. This is Kenny Gwynn. You've got to talk straight into there. Yeah, I like that.
How are you related to Saalman?
Yes, she is my niece.
Can't hear you into this microphone.
Yes, Sally is my niece, and she gave a presentation here a few months ago about her experiences in the Iraqi war. She was wounded by a suicide bomber along with other nurses. In fact, the story was in the New York Times. It was the most deadly day for women soldiers in the service since the beginning of the time. And there was, I think there was five were killed in that explosion.
Other questions out here? Okay, this was also called the Death March, the Batann March. He really went into, this guy was traveling everywhere on the ships, and it sounded like a real nice trip, but go ahead, Mr. Brett Holt.
And Brian Brett Holt. We lost a cousin in the Batann Death March, Tommy Head. They never did find his body. They left him after he was bayoneted on the road. He fell out and they bayoneted him and they had to walk on by and they couldn't pick him up. Do you recall offhand how many were killed in the Batann Death March? I know it was several thousand, but I don't recall how many it was.
Well, my father told me the first ones they captured after the Batann battle, they were the weakest soldiers there were. And they started them the first on the march. And before they got there, almost all of them were dead because they were so weak anyway. And he said all you saw was dead bodies on the side all the way to where they marched. And I guess that's why they called it the Death March.
A couple things on that. If you think MacArthur left, and he left right in, I think, in the March, and he took 24 people with him on 4 PT boats. He left 90,000 American troops on that island. 90,000. So out of this, some of these were caught. In the Batann March, I think there were 12,000 Americans and 80,000 Filipinos. And I don't know how many were lost, but it was it's a 60-mile trek that was too much and they had poor nutrition. Any other questions here? There was a guy that talked here named Spike Bell about 6 months ago. He talked about Governor Edgar Whitcomb. And his book, he became our governor, I think, 68 to 72, and he wrote Escape from Corregidor. This guy had a lot of guts. Not quite as much guts as your dad, but he had a lot of guts. Can you tell us, was he in the Batann March because he swam back and forth Corregidor and he escaped and came back? You gotta get in the microphone.
Yeah, he escaped from a prison camp that he was in. In fact, he escaped twice. They caught him the first time, but he escaped the second time and they didn't catch him.
Was he with in your dad's prison camp?
No, when in the prison camps, they weren't together. He was in a different prison camp than my father.
If you go into our room over here, right under where those people are standing. There's a room over there that's gives honor to World War II veterans. There's a whole section on Mindanao. How you pronounce that? Mindanao? Mindanao. And there's a guy that went to Boise High School here, and right where he was talking about when they took the boat back over to Mindanao, this guy was there 2.5 years. His mom got a KIA note that he was killed in action. So we have a whole display of that. And also on the opposite side of that is about a lot of nurses in World War II that were in the Philippines that escaped, and all of them got out of there without getting killed. There's about 19 of them over in that same area that your dad was in after he got out of Corregidor.
Yeah, my dad says several nurses were with him in those prison camps.
So if you think of Philippines, Teddy Roosevelt expanded the world for the United States in 1898. They took over the Philippines, and that was under our control until 1946, I believe. In 46, then they got their own independence, but it was an island control, but it made a very good stopover for all kinds of communication, for travel, for other things. So Philippines are very important to us in our, greatness of the country. Okay. Name, you got to say your name. You got to say your name and what. Yeah.
My name's Ann Wilson. My father-in-law was a prisoner of war for 3.5 years. Excuse me.
Closer to the mic. Her father-in-law was a prisoner of war for 3.5 years. Speak up so we can hear you.
Yes, he was 3.5 years in prisoner of war. He said only by the grace of God he got through that. He did the hatred. He was the calmest man. He had the softest heart. He went through. He told me some of the things he went through. But I was just amazed how he did not have any hatred. He didn't come off with the, anger or anything. This is, he said, by the grace of God, he got through.
Anybody else there? I mean, what you just said, Miss Wilson, that's just absolutely what happened to the Major Saalman. I mean, how can a human being, I think of, how can a human being go through what he went through? I don't think many of us in the room could do that. It's mind over body, and it's ingenuity, just like in Auschwitz. I mean, how do people survive these things? The human being is a tremendous fighting for survival, and this is a tremendous story. This guy, I don't know how he survived. I'd have quit 4 times. Okay, any other questions? This is a fabulous talk. We'll have it on tape for if you want to rehear, so let somebody else hear. Thank you for coming. Next 2 weeks, we got a lady talking. Thank you.
Good seeing you.
Good to see you.
You tell your honey that I said hi.
I will. Take care, Ann.